And now, Deborah Kobylt Live.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today on Deborah Kobylt Live. I am joined by journalist, writer, novelist, artist, and all sorts of things, Jennifer Ann Moses. We're going to talk about her life and also her latest book, The Man Who Loved His Wife. Thanks so much for joining us, Jennifer.
Absolutely a pleasure.
Now, before we talk to you, I do want to talk about a new sponsor to Deborah Kobylt Live. Carl Greer. He wrote The Necktie and the Jaguar. It is a memoir to help you change your story and find fulfillment, particularly if you're feeling stressed out in life and unfulfilled. And gosh, haven't we all been there? So please check out Carl Greer's latest book, The Necktie and the Jaguar. And thanks very much for giving me that time, Jennifer, to talk about our latest advertiser. Now, to you, let's talk a little bit about The Man Who Loved His Wife. I find it a fascinating book, particularly because why you wrote it. Tell us about this, please.
So the book, as you know, is a collection of short stories about my people, Jews being Jews. And each of the stories is different. They are not linked short stories, but they come from a very deep place in me, in my own search for my own Jewish path, my own Jewish identity, my own Jewish family, and my particularly Jewish culture, particularly European Jewish culture, which my ancestors come from. Over the years, I wrote these stories and collected them into the book that you had in your hands a second ago. So that's
now you said that it's written in the Yiddish tradition.
correct.
What does that mean for people who might not understand the Yiddish tradition, please?
Right. Well, Fiddler on the Roof, right? That's the Yiddish tradition that most Americans are familiar with. The Yiddish tradition, Yiddish was the language, the lingua franca, the Mama Loshen, the mother tongue of most European Jews who came to the United States over the many decades of Jewish immigration from Europe and Russia. And it was a mishmash of German, um, Slavic tongues, and Hebrew, and post-biblical Hebrew. And because the Jews didn't ever have their own country, their own nationality, they were moving over borders and between and among linguistic groups over hundreds of years in Europe. They developed their own language. It evolved naturally, obviously, and it was Yiddish. So almost every European Jew for hundreds of years spoke Yiddish along with whatever national linguistic group they were in. So if they were in France, they spoke Yiddish and French. If they were in Germany, they spoke Yiddish and German. In Poland, they spoke Polish and so forth. And in the beginning in the 18th century and into the 19th century, Yiddish was picked up by Jewish writers as a literary language. Until then, it had been considered, even among Yiddish speaking Jews, to be secondary and less than the European national tongues. It was considered, even among Jews, to be a jargon, something to be a little embarrassed about on occasion. So, but these writers began to write in the mother tongue and created a brilliant, deep world literature and European literature in Yiddish. And then what happened was when the Yiddish speaking Jews came to the United States, Yiddish may have dropped out of the family because, like all immigrant groups, we stopped speaking Yiddish or Italian or Spanish or Chinese in order to assimilate. But the tradition, the literary tradition, continued then in English, so that we in America enjoy the brilliant novels of the late great Philip Roth, for example. One of many, Cynthia Ozick, is still among us, writing, in English, but in very Yiddish infused yet English. So I'm sort of writing within that tradition, and that's because when I began to discover Yiddish literature when I was in college, I just fell head over heels in love with it. I found my star. So that's kind of a long answer to a short question.
We're going to get into some of the short stories in a little bit, but let's circle back a little bit. Let's talk about you as a kid. How did you grow up and some of your influences, right? That clearly led to this today. And then I also want to talk about you as a writer, where you've been published, and because you're quite an esteemed journalist and writer. And a lot has led up to this moment, to this book, which I think is your 7th book. Am I right?
7th. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Go ahead. Let's talk about Jennifer as a kid.
So little Jennifer grew up in McLean, Virginia, suburb of Washington. And in those days, and back in the dark ages before the internet, well before the internet, it was the countryside. There were literally more horses in McLean than there were Jews. I mean, a lot more horses. It was horsey country.
Wow.
Yeah. And we lived kind of out in the woods. We didn't have neighbors. My father worked in Washington. It was, in those days, it was a 20-minute commute. Now the same distance is probably an hour with all the traffic. He no longer lives there, and he's 92, so he's not doing the commute. But so my father worked in the city as a lawyer in Washington, and us kids, I was one of 4, and Mom, we lived out in the boonies and in the woods. And eventually we all went to school. My parents sent all 4 of us, I'm the second of 4 now, somewhat elderly children, who went to a private day school that was modeled on the English public school model, where we sang songs in ye olde English, and we danced around the maypole, and there was a Christmas play, and it was, I didn't even know it because I was a kid. This was my environment. Nobody explained it to me. Not only were we sort of the only Jews, I mean, there were a couple others, but we were among a handful of Jewish families in the whole school. But my classmates on the whole were like, year wasps. They were like as blue-blooded as blood can be blue. And they summered in Martha's Vineyard.
I mean, but how did you feel? Look, I'm
like a weirdo. I mean, what do you think? I feel like
I get it. Believe me, I get it, because I'm an Italian kid and I grew up in New Jersey, and I always felt like a weirdo, and especially, especially being a Jewish kid out in the boonies outside
and I
of
had
DC.
this hair. Of course, it wasn't gray then; it was brown. But it was all blondes, straight, partied on. It wasn't that people were mean to me or anti-Semitic. It wasn't that.
No.
It was just an incredible mismatch. And because the school also was hyper-competitive, again, along the English public school model. And I can't, to this day, I have nightmares about balls being thrown at me, right? Softball, soccer, field hockey, all of that. I was a complete klutz on the athletic fields. It just is not who I am. It's not because I'm Jewish, it's just who I was.
Right, of course.
Parents were both jocks. But it was just like, it wasn't until years later that I realized how ridiculous the whole setup was.
It sounds it to me, and I didn't even live there. So let me ask you this. Were you always a writer, though? Because let's talk a little bit about some of your published work. You worked for, which magazine did you work for? Help me out a little bit.
So my first job out of school was at Mademoiselle Magazine.
That's it. I knew it was something fancy like that. Yeah. Okay. Mademoiselle Magazine. What's that?
I learned about makeup, I mean, I had really cute clothes.
You had cute clothes. You wrote for Mademoiselle, which was quite extraordinary. That was back in, I think, 1989. You were saying that you wrote, right, in the 80s.
I got that job in like 1983, I think, when I finished school.
Oh, I'm just making you younger. Don't worry about it.
That's okay. So, you can be as young as you like.
I'm just, erasing a couple of years. But
I'm 41.
I thought 39, but okay. But so you did magazine work. You were a writer and learned a whole lot about makeup. But you've also been published in some pretty extraordinary publications, right? Everything from the New York Times, the Washington Post. Talk to me a little bit about the articles that you were writing.
So I'm now looking back over more than a minute, right? So I basically started, I just took any job that came my way. I was very ambitious. By the time I started writing for like the Washington Post, for example, by then I have 3 little babies at home.
Right.
I was not going to the office. I made the decision when my first child, who's now 32, was born, that this baby is my excuse to stay home and do what I really want to do, which is write. And in any job I could get in those days, and mainly in magazines, which is where I had been until baby Sam came along, were editorial positions. I wasn't hired on as a writer. And most of those writer jobs that I might have wanted would have been at a newspaper. And I was not a trained journalist either. So by the time I'm living in Washington, D.C. now with a baby and a husband who's a lawyer and who's never home because he's a lawyer in Washington, that dream job I might have wanted I just wasn't going to get it. So I really didn't want the dream job. I really wanted to stay home and write my own stuff. And so I started to do that. And my first real break, on paper, my first break was getting a job as a schlepper at that first job as a schlepper at Mademoiselle Magazine. But after that, the next schleppy job, I got married, had kids. My first real break was at the Washington Post, where a series of talking to people, talk to this one, talk to that one, I started writing really funny stuff about trying to cook a meal every night for this chaotic family when I just didn't even know my right from my left hand and what had happened to my life. And I used to live in New York and have like a lot of sex. And now all I do is is nurse and wipe up vomit, like what every mother does, and wipe up vomit.
Believe me.
I'm exhausted and I have to get dinner on the table on top of it and be reasonably polite to strangers. Right? So I started writing about that mess. It was like I was mommy blogging before it had been invented.
Right, before it was like a popular thing to do. And to just backtrack a little bit, you said you had to sort of get dinner on the table and sort of be nice. I wasn't able to get dinner on the table or be nice. So I get it. I think most of us were there. We're like, oh my God, it's a tough place. As you said, you're running around having the time of your life, having all the sex you want. And then all of a sudden you're right. You're wiping off, vomit from your clothes. And you're like, what happened?
Right.
Where did I go?
What happened to my life? What happened to my future?
And you're right. Like now it's a little commonplace to have podcasts about it and blogs about it. But back in the day, you were a revolutionary talking about this. So
I
bravo.
kind of was, honestly. I mean, I was in the Irma Bombeck kind of track, but she didn't talk about that stuff.
Right.
It's just, I was like the funny, loudmouth Jewish woman talking about everything that people don't talk about. Now they do. And so it hit a nerve in Washington. It got popular, and it was really fun for me because I was just writing straight out of my own life. And that put a little wind in my sails. So that became my first book, which is called...
Which one is that? Is that
Food and Wine? And it's Food and Wine. W-H-I-N-E, Food and Wine.
I love that. Food and W-H-I-N-E. And so the titles of some of these are hilarious. Bagels and Grits.
Second book.
I love that. Yeah. The book of Joshua, visiting, my gosh, where am I? I can't read my own writing. Tales from My Closet. Oh, if only my closet could talk. The Art of Dumpster Diving. These are such clever titles, and they really tell a story about what you're writing about. These are very thought out titles too, I have to say.
Yeah.
But there's quite an evolution, and now here you are with book 7. The Man Who Loved His Wife. How did you come up with this title, by the way, The Man Who Loved His Wife?
Well, the true story is I wanted to call this collection, I wanted to name the collection the title of the first story in the book. First story in the book is The Uncircumcised. And my publisher said, we'll get weirdo email. We'll get weirdo, sexually perverted, weird stuff. So no, we can't do that. Never would have occurred to me. Sex, I said, okay.
Yeah. Me neither. I'm thinking, is that a title I would have picked up or not really? So go ahead. So how did this one happen? The Man Who Loved His Wife.
Because I mean, it was really, I was just trying to choose the best title among the titles of the stories in the book. My next favorite title for the collection was The Holy Messiah, which is the title of the second story in the book. And she said, no, people are going to think it's going to be Christian Jesus, Go to Jesus book.
Oh.
Right? The Holy Messiah. So, which is not what it is.
No.
So I thought, look, The Man Who Loved His Wife is just a really nice title. So that's the whole story.
Oh, I love that. That's
your glamour behind it.
I figured a homage to your husband, but I know the Uncircumcised is one of your favorite excerpts from the book. Also, Do This Together. Am I right about that?
Yeah.
Can you just briefly talk about how you got the idea for each of these short stories? By the way, people, I'm just getting a little teaser. The Uncircumcised was not what I expected. That's all I want to say. At all. That story was not what I had expected. I thought we were going to go to a bris or something. I had no idea. And by starting with that short story, it got me very excited about the subsequent stories in this book. Very, very smart and clever piece you wrote there. But if you want to just very briefly talk about some of the ideas, some of the short stories in here.
Brief, yeah. I'm Jewish. I don't do brief, but I'll try.
I know. I'm Italian. I'm worse.
Yeah, right,
so
right. And we got our hands talking too. So the Uncircumcised is set in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where I lived for many years after Washington and my lawyer husband. My lawyer husband decided to be a law professor. We moved to Baton Rouge, where LSU is. So now I'm in Baton Rouge. And there was an elderly man in our congregation who was a survivor of the Holocaust. And I just thought about him on occasion. And then I got a dog for the first time, and I felt like she spoke to me. We communicated with each other better than I did with most people, and certainly with my own family members. And then I just had this idea, what if my dog spoke Hebrew? And I thought, what if the dog spoke Yiddish? And then the whole story just came to me. Survivor with a rescue dog who speaks to him in Yiddish. And I don't want to give the rest of it away.
No, don't give it away, because it's a good teaser for this. And as I said, a lot of these, particularly based on the title, was not what I had expected,
Right.
But it really drew me in. You talked about Louisiana. You had some influences quite a bit from living down there, right?
Absolutely.
With the community down there. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, my husband and I lived there with our 3 children, who are now all adults. We really raised our kids in Baton Rouge. We were there 13 years, and those were like the really thick in the middle of your life years.
Right.
So 13 might not be that many years in a lifetime, depending on how long you live, of course. But those were the thick raising the kids years, so they really stuck in a good way. And we had a wonderful series of like interlocking communities. We had our neighborhood, which we loved. I'm still so close to my neighbors. I still think of them as my neighbors. Miss Becky, Miss Liz.
No, but that's beautiful. But the community there, the African American community there, had a real impact on you, didn't it?
And that too. And then we had our Jewish community. And then once my babies were in school 5 days a week, I started volunteering at a home for people who were dying of AIDS. And that was almost entirely African American staff as well as residents. And I volunteered there once a week for 10 years. And that just really got into me, because most of the people, again, both staff and residents, were really full gospel African American, just full of faith and love of Jesus. And it was very palpable. And it was so different from any way I had ever understood my own connection both to Judaism, which is a very different kind of religion, and how it's expressed and how it's practiced, but also just to my own search and for a connection to the divine, to the God, to something bigger than myself. So all of that got in. But also it was just, it was the blues, and it was the lingo, and it was the heat, and it was the food, and it was everything you might guess a small southern city all the way down there hugging the banks of the Mississippi would have. And, and I just kind of loved it. I just ate it up. So yeah, it was a lot. It was a big difference from being raised on the East Coast in the kind of family where if you don't go to an Ivy League college, you're a schmuck, to the deep, deep South. And it's football also and all that stuff.
You also did the cover art for this.
Correct.
You are an extraordinary artist. I believe that we have some of your artwork that we can show on our show, at least for our video portion of our show.
Right.
Wow. When did you start doing artwork? And you have been compared to a few artists, namely Grandma Moses. By the way, she's one of my favorites. And I know there is absolutely no connection whatsoever, but she happens to be one of my favorites. And because actually of her story, how she didn't start painting until much, much later in life.
Right.
But that's here nor there. But when I read that, I got very, very excited. Where does the inspiration for the artwork come?
Well, that again, that's a direct inspiration. When I was a child, I loved to paint. The art room at this private school I went to was sort of my refuge, and I had a wonderful, gentle teacher who made me feel welcome. And then when I got to high school, I decided I needed to really lean more on my brain and push the intellectual stuff and go to college and all that stuff, which I certainly don't regret. But I put the artistic side, the part of my body, my hands that needed to make things. That just kind of faded away. I didn't put it away on purpose. It kind of naturally took a back burner. And one day I was working at St. Anthony's, this AIDS home, and the people who lived there and the staff gathered in the front room to sing gospel, which is what they did now and again. It was just like something they did. And one of the nurses noticed I wasn't singing and asked me why. And I said, I can't sing worth a damn, which is true. Because I don't mind singing praises to Jesus. I don't think God cares what name we call him by. And I would love to sing gospel along with these people I got to know so well. But I can't sing. I can't sing a note. So the ladies there, the staff began, these were all Black, full gospel, African-American ladies, started asking me if they wanted them to pray over me, to ask Jesus to give me a voice. I said, yes, of course. Who wouldn't, right?
I'll take it. I'll
right?
take it, yeah.
So week after week, the hands-on praying, and I still couldn't sing, but one day it's like my hand, I couldn't stop. My hand picked up a paintbrush and could not stop. And so something burst open in me through that praying that they did that was in there all along. It came out in paint. It didn't come out singing because I can't.
Well, someone up there was saying, we've got enough singers, but I'll tell you what, we could use an artist. Right. So there you go. And some of your artwork is so stunning. And I know all proceeds from your artwork goes where?
Well, for the past couple of years, I've been selling only for donations to food banks since COVID hit. Because, hello, that's why.
Because hello, that's why is right.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing that. Thank you for doing that. Jennifer Ann Moses, you're such an inspiring person. And I'll tell you why, at least for me. I like that you have such an arc to your life and career. Not just one lane or one road. It's like, oh, good heavens. You go on all different sides of roads, and everything you've done well. Your journalist work, being a mom, all the moving around you've done, your 7 books, your artwork to me is really extraordinary. How can people find out more about you, please?
Well, Google my name, Jennifer Ann Moses. It all pops up. Basically, I'm all over the webs, the interweb, as my kids call it.
And right. And what do you want to tell people who are out there sort of stuck in their own careers and not sure what to do or what direction? What words of advice do you have for them?
I'm not great with advice. I can only speak really out of my own path, my own experience. But I do think each of us is born with inner wisdom, inner direction. And then what happens is as we grow up, depending on our families, our communities, our schools, all those outside influence, those intuitions and voices can be drowned out by what the world or mom and dad or whoever it might be says you're supposed to be. And I think those of us who are fortunate enough to have been able to pursue what our innards, what our guts, or in Yiddish, what our kishkas are telling us, generally do okay. Not necessarily with a big career, but that's not what it's about. It's about finding that work that feels right for you, that you can feel passionate and good about, and that you're suited for. I mean, I've got 3 kids. My daughter works with children on the spectrum, little kids. I mean, I could do that for 2 minutes without wanting to shoot myself because I have the patience of a flea.
Right.
Her twin,
Right.
right?
I'm sorry, go ahead. Well, to your
Sorry.
point, we're all different, right?
Right.
And whatever path it is that we choose, I say keep going until you find it. Just before you, I had on a wonderful artist. His name is Ruben Rojas, and he was in finance until one day he just said, I can't do this anymore.
Right.
And he's become a very well-known community artist with a real social message that comes right out of here. Same thing, right? It's like, we're all different. If we can just follow what we're supposed to be doing, that inner voice. And I think a lot of times it comes out when we're most confused, when we don't know what we're doing. It's like, all right, that's a good thing. That's what I like to say to people. That's a good thing. Follow it. So you followed yours, Jennifer. Jennifer Ann Moses, your book, people pick it up on Amazon?
Absolutely.
Okay. And your artwork, how can we pick that up? Because I'm a bit of a
on
fan
my
of
website.
that.
On my website. Get in touch with the artist and we can talk.
Yeah, no, I'm a big fan. So I may be getting in touch with the artist myself because some of these pieces I think are absolutely extraordinary. Jennifer Ann Moses, thanks for joining us. What's next? What's next for you?
Oh, what's next for me is I'm going to be throwing a wedding for my daughter.
Ah, nice. Very nice.
And I'm working on another book, a novel, also set in Baton Rouge.
Set in Baton Rouge. Wonderful. And by the way, just before I let you go, I just want to say, people, you don't have to understand or even be in the Jewish tradition for this book. I loved it. It spoke to me. It's very, very well written and very, very smart, very wise. And each of these stories are different. As you said, they don't connect. But once you start, it's really tough to put this book down. So Jennifer M. Moses, thank you very much. Please pick up The Man Who Loved His Wife. Great title. And everybody, you can find our show on YouTube, on Facebook, on Instagram, and on all audio podcast platforms, whether it's iHeartRadio or Apple or Amazon. If you look up Deborah Kobylt Live, you'll find us and our interview with Jennifer Ann Moses. So thanks again for being with us, Jennifer. And
thanks again for having me. Such a pleasure.
Yeah, wonderful. I loved it. And right. And I feel like I know you, right? So
likewise.
Yeah, very, very similar backgrounds.
Yeah.
But anyway, everybody, thanks for being here. We'll see you next time.